there was a time when Italian football didn't just command respect, it demanded fear. It was about dictating the rhythm and the culture of the sport itself. With a foundation forged from the defense and a midfield mind schooled in the dark arts of tactical warfare, the Italians shaped football with a philosophy that was both beautiful and brutal. Italian football's signature style was so recognizable that the term catenaccio, or door-bolt football, was born, used to describe a tactical system in football with insane emphasis on defense. But catenaccio wasn't just a system, it was a statement, a mirror of a nation that found glory in discipline, structure, and the elegance of a 1-0 win. We're talking about a nation that's won 4 World Cups and 2 European Championships, a nation with clubs that historically reigned supreme in Europe like AC Milan, Juventus, and Inter Milan. A nation filled with all-time footballing legends like Paolo Maldini, Franco Baresi, Roberto Baggio, Gianluigi Buffon, Fabio Cannavaro, and many more. Italian football was the gold standard. Even when they weren't the most skillful or flashy, they were the most feared. And more often than not, they were the most successful. But that Italy, the one whose shirt once carried the weight of tactical genius, generational talent, and cold-blooded resolve, is long gone. Today, the Azzurri are so bad it's almost like a joke, a complete and utter disgrace to not only the history of Italian football, they might as well be a mockery to the history of Italy itself. Because if you want to feel old, the last time that the Italian men's team played a World Cup match was over a decade ago, back in the 2014 World Cup. And the last time they played an elimination match in the World Cup was all the way back in the 2006 World Cup. And if you have any hope for them in this upcoming 2026 World Cup, well, Italy might not even qualify, as right now they're struggling at 3rd in their group qualifying table, behind Norway and Israel, of all countries. Let that sink in for a moment. So just what the hell happened? How did a nation that once wrote football's rulebook become one that's now barely invited to the table? How did Italy, once the soul of the beautiful game, lose its way? To truly understand this embarrassing fall, we first have to remember the peak, then go on and trace every horrific misstep that would eventually follow. Because long before tiki-taka, gegenpressing, or modern-day playbooks, Italy were laying down the blueprints rooted in discipline, intelligence, and the art of control. And this goes back all the way to the 1930s, with Italy winning back-to-back World Cups in 1934 and 1938. Sure, it's a long time ago, and I'm confident that nobody from back then is watching this video. But those victories weren't just footballing achievements. They would help build the foundations for the growth of a modern Italy. As on the political side, Benito Mussolini would use those World Cup victories, not only to promote national pride, but also to promote societal and infrastructural advancement, regardless of what you think of the guy. But after World War II, those early foundations would help build the seeds of dominance that would later bloom throughout the following decades. And the result of this was Serie A rising to prominence, over the years becoming arguably the most competitive and star-studded league in the world by the 1990s. And much of the success was largely defined by catenaccio. And over the decades in Italian football, it would become more and more popular. And although a tactic that prioritizes defense might sound boring, there's actually a lot more to it. Catenaccio relies on a deep-lying sweeper or a libero, bridging a solid back line and a tight-knit midfield. It never relied on heavy pressing, it did rely a lot on tight man marking, although it doesn't pressure the opposition like gegenpressing does. In contrast, Catenaccio had a lot less holes in its defense. But make no mistake, in Catenaccio, whenever the ball was repossessed, they would quickly step on the gas and hit with a swift counterattack. To outsiders, maybe it was anti-football, but to Italians, it was brilliant. A perhaps slower but more calculated way to win with ice-cold efficiency. Quickly, it became their national identity. Stoic, cunning, and ruthlessly effective. Catenaccio was working, and it was winning matches. With this, Italy once more lifted the World Cup in 1982, and by then, Serie A had become home to the world's best. Diego Maradona, Michel Platini, Marco van Basten, and Ruud Gullit all played in Italy. And by the 1990s were the golden decade for Serie A football. Italian clubs dominated Europe. The league's tactics, style, and star power were unmatched. Players like Roberto Baggio, Franco Baresi, Alessandro Del Piero, and Paolo Maldini weren't just great, they were immortalized in Italian football. And even though at the time AC Milan became the greatest dynasty in club football history, Serie A was still very competitive, and the league was like a weekly chess match watched by millions. And although by the start of the 2000s, while the names and players that embodied this Italian style were at the end of an era, they would still proceed to win the 2006 World Cup. Not by destroying their opponents offensively and scoring a ton of goals, but by having a rock-solid defense and a truly genius midfield, not needing more than 1 or 2 goals to steal the victory. But what came after wasn't a graceful descent. It was a collapse. For Italian football, it seemed like decades and decades of success eventually bred complacency. And after their 2006 World Cup win, Italy seemed to believe that their formula would last forever. The immediate years that followed were marked by a failure to refresh their squad. Icons like Cannavaro, Gattuso, and Del Piero were nearing the twilights of their career. And by this time, Italy's pipeline of fresh talent had already started to dry up. Italian youth club systems, once among the best in the world, lost the edge to those in Germany, Spain, and even England, and they were simply no longer producing world-beater talent at the same rate. You could argue that the Calciopoli scandals really set Italian football back, ruining its overall image and reputation, making it a lot less attractive for young talents to choose Italy as their destination. Heck, you might even argue that the talent was there, but for various reasons, societal or personal, many players' careers would stall and they would never reach their full potential. And a perfect example is Mario Balotelli. Regardless, the lack of generational transition became painfully clear in the 2010 World Cup. Even as the reigning champions, Italy crashed out in the group stages. They failed to win a single match in a group that included Paraguay, Slovakia, and New Zealand. That was their worst tournament performance in decades, and immediately the alarm bells should have rung louder, but for some reason, they stayed complacent. Simultaneously, Serie A was crumbling. The league's giants couldn't keep up with the rapidly growing English Premier League or the primetime attraction of Spain's Galacticos era. Clubs failed to modernize their stadiums, invest in commercial ventures, or attract top-tier foreign investment, aka oil money. Italian football as well, globally, and television was getting less and less attractive. Even though the Italian style was effective on the pitch, many younger and newer fans of the next generation didn't quite find the play style as appealing as other leagues. But even then, the signature Italian style was losing its effectiveness. On the tactical front, while Spain evolved into a possession-based force, and Germany transformed through youth and pace, Italy fell into stagnation. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, but without the midfield and defensive genius that Italy has produced for decades and decades, the Italian way of football was just not optimized to win. Without the talent to fill its demands, the system that had once given Italy its dominance had now become its prison. So if the late 2000s were a decline, for Italy, the 2010s were a full-blown crisis of identity. Once more, Italy's failures at the 2014 World Cup with another group stage exit confirmed that the issues were not getting better. Sure, the team showed flashes of quality. After all, they did beat England in the opener. However, they would lose to Costa Rica and Uruguay, finishing third in the group. Until this day, that was the very last time they've ever played a World Cup match. Because in 2018, they would hit rock bottom when Italy failed to qualify for the World Cup altogether. That was their first time since 1958, more than half a century ago, that the Azzurri would fail to qualify for the World Cup. Behind the scenes, the Italian Football Federation was clueless. Leadership changes were frequent, vision was absent, and structural reforms were delayed or ignored completely. While countries like Germany overhauled their football after early failures, and even France had built world-class youth academies and made a clear pathway for young talent. By contrast, Italy kept patching holes instead of rebuilding the ship. Italian academies were producing very few elite players, and the result was Serie A clubs preferring to sign older veterans or foreign imports. Basically, short-term results were prioritized over long-term planning. And this would go on in a loop, only further damaging their youth development and producing even less elite players. Interestingly and ironically enough, while Italian managers like Carlo Ancelotti and Antonio Conte thrived abroad, Italian players on the other hand did not. Few would make the leap to top foreign clubs and even fewer succeeded. Italy wasn't just losing on the pitch, it was losing its soul. The philosophy, identity, and swagger that once defined Italian football had vanished. What remained was a confused, risk-averse, broken system. That's why, out of nowhere, their Euro 2020 win was so surprising. Roberto Mancini's side stormed through the tournament, winning with style, unity, and purpose. They pressed high, swiftly, and played with energy that Italy hadn't shown in over a decade. It felt like Mancini reinvented the national side with an emphasis on ball control, fluid movements, and team chemistry. Italy went on to beat Belgium, Spain, and finally England in penalties, lifting just their second ever European championship. The country celebrated like it just won the World Cup, and for a moment it felt like the demons of the past decade had been exorcised. But this didn't last. Just 15 months later, Italy failed to qualify for the 2022 World Cup. A shocking loss to North Macedonia of all places sent them crashing out. It proved that Euro 2020 was an outlier, but not reflective of a deep, systematic reform. The problems that had plagued Italian football, talent depth, governance, and vision, were never really truly addressed. And it's sad because Italy showed the world what they could be again, but it was only a glimpse. Today, Italian football is caught in limbo. The national team, now under former Italian legend Gennaro Gattuso, is still slowly rebuilding. However, their core issues remain: a lack of star power, a shallow talent pool, and a nation unsure of how it wants to play. Their forwards, midfielders, and defenders are nowhere near the best in the world. In all honesty, the only truly world-class player they have is their goalkeeper Gianluigi Donnarumma. I mean, sure, their defense is pretty good, but no longer better than everyone else. Inter Milan, the only Italian side to make it deep in the Champions League, only have a handful of Italian players, notably Alessandro Bastoni and Nicolo Barella. Financially, Serie A also lags behind. The stadium modernization is slow, TV rights pale in comparison to that of the Premier League, and overall the footballing market around Italy just seems outdated. Sure, Serie A is very rich in tradition, however, they are quite poor in innovation. In just the past few years alone, the Italian national side has went through a carousel of managers. Mancini to Spalletti to now Gattuso. They've honestly been like the Man United of European nations. So right now, Italy is no longer feared. Opponents see them as easily beatable, but they're no longer trendsetters and they are far from having world-class talent once more. So, is there any hope for Italy? Short term in making it back to the World Cup? Yeah, sure. In World Cup qualifiers, they are third place and 3 points behind Israel. However, they do have a match in September. And honestly, there's no way they're going ahead of Norway and qualifying automatically. So if they do get second place in their group, they're gonna have to battle it out. However, even if they do make it, at this point, honestly, I don't think they're gonna go very far. But over the long term, I predict it's gonna be a very difficult path for Italy. The entirety of Serie A and Italian football culture has to get an update. They have to modernize, market better, and catch up with the modern game if they ever wish to see the same financial success that will help clubs grow and attract more talent. At the youth level, there are some encouraging signs. Italy's under-20 team did reach the final of the 2023 World Cup, so they do have quite a few youngsters coming up that have a lot of talent. Tactically, Serie A teams have improved their diversity, and we did see an Italian side like Inter make it all the way to the Champions League final. There's even been talks of structural reform, like modernizing stadiums, adjusting league formats, and finding ways to attract investors and in turn, attracting young talent. If followed through correctly, these could re-energize Italian football. While Italy have fallen very low, it's not irreversible. However, for a rebirth to happen, the nation must let go of the romantic nostalgia and instead embrace a new identity. One built on youth, risk-taking, and adaptability. Because if Italy want to be feared again, they must remember not just how to defend, but also how to score and take the lead.